Found it interesting about Bitcoin is that, I've been following Bitcoin loosely ever since roughly it came out. I mean, a year or two after it came out, I'd heard about it. I had liked the idea. I'd never been one of those like antagonist people towards Bitcoin. But when you hear about like a new digital money,
Hey guys, welcome back to Everyday Finance. In this video, Lyn Alden discuss about Bitcoin. According to Lyn Alden believed the reason for this is that in the years before Lyn was persuaded that Bitcoin is functioning properly, Lyn Alden spent a lot of time simply describing issues. Here's the issue. Lyn have this investment plan. But Lyn Alden don't really have any structural ideas for what to take action since, it's just an issue and will be such for a long time, which many people kind of fall victim to entering that snare. It begins to appear quite jumbled if you study macro sufficiently. And if you notice all these instabilities developing Lyn Alden believed that many people become somewhat cynical. And what Lyn discovered, what's interesting about Bitcoin, is that, as you may know, Lyn Alden been watching it sporadically. Ever since it launched, Lyn had heard about it a year or two after it was released. And Lyn liked the concept, even though I'd never been one of individuals who are hostile to Bitcoin. And lots of things Lyn Alden discuss, so please watch the video to end. And share this video, and subscribe our channel Everyday Finance. Thanks.
I think it's because in the years prior to me being convinced that Bitcoin is working well, a lot of my focus was on describing problems. So describing here's a problem, here's how I'm going to invest around it, but I don't really have any sort of structural ideas on what to do about it. It's just a problem and it's going to be a problem for a long time, which a lot of people kind of fall into that trap. If you study macro enough, it starts to look very messy. And then if you see all these instabilities building up, I think a lot of people get kind of cynical. And what I found interesting about Bitcoin is that, I have been following Bitcoin loosely ever since roughly it came out. I mean, a year or two after it came out, I'd heard about it. I had liked the idea. I'd never been one of those like antagonist people towards Bitcoin. But when you hear about like a new digital money, when you kind of place odds on what's the chance this thing's going to be actually a giant deal, it's low. But after it's been around for 14 plus years, it's been through multiple cycles. It's had various technical challenges thrown at it. It's had various regulatory challenges at it. It's the only asset I know of that has declined in price by at least 75% on 3 separate occasions and came back to new all-time highs. Most of the best stocks in the world managed to do that maybe once. And so it's basically, it's got a resilience to it that I did not necessarily anticipate in the beginning. And so, if you just kind of keep running into it, you get interested in it. And for me, it's a potential solution to the set of problems that I analyze. So instead of always talking about the problems, I can now focus on solutions. And then secondarily, because my background is that blend of engineering and finance, the idea of merely trading around assets is, that's an important market function, but it's not something that I necessarily find a lot of meaning in. I generally find meaning in either building things or educating. And I know you take education seriously too. That's why you teach. And I'm kind of a similar view. I either want to be, taking knowledge that's known by only some and broadening it and giving my interpretation to make it clear.
Lyn Alden wished to actively provide assistance, make anything, even in a tiny way, that didn't exist before, which is why Lyn Alden also involved with Bitcoin Venture, as you have the option to accept a portion of my engineering or engineering management experience as well as the kind given the financial basis and assistance, albeit in a very small manner, in building a small component that makes this type of tapestry come together, as well as the extent of engagement. And Lyn Alden think that this entire space has grabbed me in terms of curiosity and impact. But Lyn Alden still find myself drawn to Lyn, want to be able to communicate with both worlds. Therefore, that's something Lyn Alden trained to do from the starting, so Lyn still focused on macro. But Lyn believed Bitcoin is the key, is such a Boolean result that in the event that Bitcoin fails, that's one type of history path. And in the event that Bitcoin becomes extremely popular, that's a whole different history path that involves macro. Let's back to the Lyn Alden interview.
And if Bitcoin is highly successful, that's a very different history path, which includes macro. So I think actually a fundamental question in macro, especially long-term macro, not this year, but looking out 10, 15 years, one of the flowchart questions you have to answer near the beginning is Bitcoin like a multi-trillion-dollar equivalent asset by that point, or is it stagnated or dead? Yeah, so in the book, to some ways, money has always been imperfect. Perfect money is a platonic ideal that's always reached for but never achieved. The state that I consider money to be broken is really in the telecom era. So basically, ever since the invention and specifically the adoption of the telegraph. So it was invented in the 1830s, but it wasn't really deployed in a cross-continent, cross-ocean way until the 1860s, and then it even took to the early 1900s to get, kind of worldwide across the Pacific and elsewhere. And ever since then, we've, obviously we've sped things up. We have other digital technologies, but we're in this telecom environment. So that, you're talking a century and a half. And that's a period where transaction speeds and settlement speeds were completely divorced from each other in a way that had not previously been the status quo. And that's kind of the period that I consider to be the modern era of finance and this kind of specific type of brokenness that I'm talking about. That basically there's such a mismatch that credit and abstraction becomes at the core of the system. And so basically, how long can something stay broken? In various ways, the answer can be a century and a half or more, right? And so when we look forward, I think the dollar is going to be around in some meaningful form for decades. There are non-linear aspects to this, so there are things that could completely shorten that, or things that could completely extend that, like whether or not you kind of reset the system and have a whole nother cycle ahead of you, or not. And again, part of it is did Bitcoin succeed or not? Because if there's no alternative, then when something breaks, it can be reconstituted in a slightly altered form and have a whole another 50 years, 100 years. Or if Bitcoin exists and is functioning and is kind of unstoppable, then maybe the dollar system fails sooner than that. But either way, I think that the dollar system is such a powerful, large network effect. Depending on how you define it, it's at least tens of trillions of dollars. All the structures built on top of it. I mean, we're talking, hundreds of trillions realistically. And that's a ship that turns very, very slowly. It's not like an emerging market currency that can break in a year. That is a very kind of powerful thing that I think is going to be here for decades. I think another question to ask is what phase of breakage would the dollar kind of have almost like emerging market characteristics, like inflation that they can never quite get down to their target no matter what they do, because the overall kind of debt is so high that any sort of meaningful interest rates completely blow out the deficit. Those aspects I think could be sooner. I think we're seeing tastes of it at the moment, but that doesn't mean they can't get it necessarily under control in this cycle. But I think that we're kind of in that earlier phase where some serious developed market currencies behave in some ways like emerging market currencies around the margins, and I think that period could come and go. It could be a recurring theme, and I think that's
Lyn Alden believed that the dollar will endure for many years to come in some significant form. This has some non-linear characteristics, so you realize that there are things that could make it entirely shorter, or things that may take that a step further and include another aspect, such as whether or not you kind of reset the system and start a new cycle. The question is whether Bitcoin succeeded or failed, because, well, when something fails, there's no other option. It has the potential to be reconstituted in a slightly modified form and last for another 50, 100 or years. Bitcoin existing is operational and appears to be kind of unstoppable. So perhaps the dollar system will collapse sooner rather than later. That being said, Lyn Alden believed the dollar system to be incredibly potent vast network. If you learned something from this video, then please like this video and subscribe our channel Everyday Finance, and we will meet in next video. Thanks.